Hello, my name is William Blevins. This project is going to be for Counseling 6323, Crisis Response and Trauma Care. For this assignment, we're going to discuss the aspects of 3 of the 7 phases of disaster. We're going to look at the needs and challenges of the heroic phase, the crash point of the honeymoon phase, and the clinical conditions often seen in the disillusionment phase, and the potential treatment strategies for those conditions. Yeah, so first we're gonna talk about the needs and the challenges of the heroic phase. Um, and first, I want to kind of explain what the heroic phase looks like. Um, it occurs immediately after the disaster impact and usually lasts. It can last for hours to days, sometimes weeks. Silver and Greek Martin 2015 say that this phase is marked by high altruism and community unity. Hanoi and Brown describe it as it involves saving others, temporary relocation, promoting safety, and receiving support from government agencies. Um, I want to reference the HCU video, The Needs and Challenges of Disasters. Um, she painted a really good picture of this phase. The experience that she talked about was the response to Hurricane Katrina, and she explained that the survivors often deny the impact on themselves, the homes, the families. That survivors go to extraordinary measures to protect their home and family, and that really is the first part that characterizes this phase is that there's often an unawareness of self, right? They don't really understand the physical and the emotional toll that's happening during this. The concentration is more um, on responding, on saving, finding all these actions, really adrenaline based behavior. And often results in just being overworked and completely exhausted. And so I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that this creates, right? So um, obviously the exhaustion, right? It's usually masked during this phase by the adrenaline. I mentioned the over functioning, the nonstop work. Another challenge is the exposure to trauma cues. You have to remember that during these disasters, whether it's a survivor, families, people in the community, or first responders, they're witnessing the devastating effects, right? So whether that's human loss, human injury, or just natural devastation, community devastation, all of those take a toll. Um, Another challenge is role overload, right? So a survivor that's helping is a survivor. They're also a helper. They're also a community member. And so a lot of times they can feel overwhelmed with not knowing what to do or trying to do too much. Another challenge would be lack of resources and bottlenecks. So as all the resources come in, um, if there's not good coordination um, and good communication, then potentially that can create the bottlenecks where the resources don't actually make it to the front line or to the uh, point of contact of where it needs to be. Another challenge is early moral distress, right? So with first responders, they're making a lot of different triage decisions, meaning they have to decide who's critical, who's not critical, um, based on availability, who to help. And so this can create some emotional issues later on, just that exposure, um, and just especially if they're feeling a sense of the inability to save everyone. And then last challenge I want to mention is emotional numbing. Um, right, we during this phase I talked about the lack of self awareness, and so a lot of that is due to the shock, the emotional numbing, which usually resurfaces at a later time. I want to briefly talk about the needs of the workers and the survivors. So they need safety and stabilization. Um, they need physical safety. They need medical care. They have basic needs like they need the water, the shelter, equipment. They need rapid assessment of their condition, or they need to make a rapid assessment of the survivor's condition. That would include providing psychological first aid. Math et al. 2015 says that the psychological needs include grounding, reassurance, and clear communication. And so, because of their unawareness, they really just need that grounding to help them understand um, what's happening, and maybe some suggestions on how to take care of themselves during this difficult phase. All right, so that gets us to the honeymoon phase. We're going to talk about what that is, and then what is the crash point of the honeymoon phase. Um, Math et al. 2015 says that the honeymoon phase usually lasts about 2 to 4 weeks after the relief agencies arrive. And so during this phase, it just really closely follows the heroic phase. Um, it's marked by optimism, unity, gratitude, and strong community bonding. Uh, Silver and Greek Martin 2015 state that communities often experience a surge in social cohesion. And so this is kind of a continuation of that heroic phase where um, there's a lot of feel good stories floating around. The survivors feel a sense of gratitude for all the resources. You know, you've got government agencies and volunteers, resources, financial support, donations. And so all that creates a bit of a high point that they call the honeymoon phase, right? The video from HCU talks about that the survivors feel a strong sense of gratitude. They still have a belief that everything is going to be okay. Um, they're holding on to a sense that normalcy is still possible, and so the crash point specifically, it hits about 2 to 6 weeks post disaster. Um, as mentioned before in the video, they use Hurricane Katrina as the example, and she explained how exhaustion sets in. So all the work, all the overfunctioning that we mentioned in the heroic phase, it kind of continues, but then you hit a point where physically and emotionally you can't continue, and that's really what characterizes the crash point. Reality becomes clear. The physical ailments and the accumulated physical toll, they all start to show. Um, Math et al. 2015 talks about the outside help. You know, it begins to decrease. The support kind of normalizes, and then the survivors just hit that emotional fatigue. Um, Silver and Greek Martin talk about the how the media attention fades. You usually start running into some bureaucratic delays during this time. Um, and like I said before, the reasons why it happens, it just physically, uh, the individuals hit a wall. There's a realization that the rebuilding is really slow, and creates a lot of frustration. And from a survivor standpoint, there's still a lot of unmet expectations. And so all of that kind of comes together. Yeah, so when that crash point happens, um, there's the emergence of the grief and the trauma symptoms that were previously suppressed. Um, Other things that can kind of cause individuals to hit the crash point are, you know, they have probably lost their job if their business was destroyed. There's displacement. There's financial strain. All right, so finally, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the disillusionment phase. Um, in this phase, fear, anger, hopelessness, they can set in, and so I just want to talk about that, and then the clinical conditions that can develop and potential treatments for those clinical conditions. Um, the disillusionment phase is often characterized by, like I said before, like the disappointment. Um, survivors are disillusioned because agencies and volunteers, they pull out their assistance, the community's hope for restoration, um, back to the pre-disaster wellness, are typically unfulfilled by this time, and so the community cohesion begins to weaken a little bit. The survivors become angry and hopeless, dealing with the financial pressures. A lot of them have either been relocated or they're living in damaged homes. There's family discord. There's a lack of free time for recreation and for self care. Questions like, why is this taking so long? Where is all the help now? Um, those those descriptions basically describe the uh, disillusionment phase. Math et al. 2015 said the phase can last 3 to 36 months. The um, the HCU video gave really great descriptions here. It talks about how there was a huge increase in counseling needs. That the emotional reactions during this phase include hopelessness, feelings of abandonment. They're fearful about the financial future. They're angry. There's a sense of futility, and so um, there's they saw it in at the end of Katrina there, where there's an increased severity in PTSD cases. Not only do they appear in greater numbers, they see a higher level of severity. Makwana 2019 talks about how depression and anxiety increase. They often uh, are produced because they're related to a loss of home, income, routine, social networks, things like that. And so some of the common clinical conditions include the PTSD that we mentioned earlier, post traumatic stress syndrome. This is usually due to intrusive memories, hypervigilance, and avoidance. Survivors and first responders deal with depression, right? Sense of hopelessness, diminished motivation. Prolonged grief is another issue that we see, persistent longing for what was lost. Um, Maladaptive coping, substance use. Um, these are prevalent during this time. Um, and then adjustment disorders, right? Difficulty adapting to the displacement, job changes, the rebuilding process. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the effective treatments for these conditions. This comes from the Makwana article, the Math et al. Article, and the Hanoi Brown article. But trauma focused CBT, this is evidence based treatment. This helps survivors regain control of their thoughts, and it helps them to avoid the maladaptive coping that can be established during this time. EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is another strong evidence based treatment for trauma symptoms. Um, Grief counseling and supportive therapy is very important during this time. Um, Also helping to facilitate cultural rituals, specifically church. Those church communities during this time is a great help in the healing process. Um, Community based programs and intervention, stabilizing their practical needs. So housing, employment, financial support. They Although those are social aspects, they have a very positive psychological impact on the individuals. Um, that the Silver, Grech, and Marting article I referred to earlier, um, just restoring those community structures can help re-implement uh, routines, and that type of support has a really positive it helps in psychological recovery. As we close, I wanted to provide my references that were used in this presentation, and thank you for listening.